Hey everyone, we're back. It's season 9, and this season of Beyond the Plate is brought to you by our friends at Ford's Gin. Ford's Gin, a gin created to cocktail. For our audio test, we like to ask our guest to name 3 of something or 5 of something. For you both, let's go with 3 of something for each of you. Larry, name 3 of your favorite farmers market ingredients.
I would think that for me, the 3 would be a rose veal that we found at the market, Tongass Creamery, and of course, the different bread companies.
Got it. Mark, name 3 of your favorite farmers market ingredients.
Right now, strawberries, sugar snaps, and what did I just see? Zucchini.
All right, you both sound good. Let's go. Hey everyone, I'm Cappy, and you're listening to Beyond the Plate, the Duo season. I'm a chef by trade and hospitality professional. By day, I head up Rachel Ray's culinary operations and co-founded her cooking and kids charity called Yummo. 5 years ago, I had the idea to put together a podcast where we sit down with the world's culinary elite to explore their journey into the food industry and the social impact they have made in their community. Hence, the name Beyond the Plate. If you're new to the pod, welcome. If you listened before, we're so glad you're back. This season, we're featuring some of the greatest restaurant and hospitality duos in the industry, and we're grateful to our partners who make this podcast a reality. With that, as you just heard, this episode is brought to you by our friends at Ford's Gin. Ian, they're back.
They're back. We're back. This is so exciting.
Everyone, that's Ian. He's our co-executive producer, and you're going to be hearing more of him this season when we do these shout-outs to our partners for a couple reasons. 1, we love our partners. And 2, we tend to geek out about them offline and figured why not let our listeners hear how we genuinely feel about them.
I mean, Cappy, what? We do 10, 15 calls a week about our partners? I mean, we genuinely love them. And we genuinely love Ford's Gin. All of us here at Beyond the Plate love Ford's Gin and drink it a little bit here and there.
So psyched to be working with them again. And not only are we working with them again, they're back as presenting sponsor of Beyond the Plate this season. So we've got some fun things ahead. We're going to cover a lot of ground this season, but let me just wet your palates a little bit. I'm a gin and tonic fan. I also love a Negroni.
Don't forget about the martini.
Ian's a martini guy. Regardless, here's the deal with Ford's, everybody. We all know seeing a bunch of different gin bottles at a bar or a restaurant, or even if you're at a liquor store, can be a little daunting. So Ford's Gin was crafted by bartenders for bartenders and at-home bartenders alike to make a really good gin cocktail. Simon Ford, who's been on the pod 2 times now, noticed bartenders had various go-to gins for different classic gin cocktails and thought, why not make a gin that bartenders could use that would work perfectly in all of these drinks, while keeping it at an accessible price. So that's what he did.
He did. And speaking of bartenders, I actually was at a liquor store the other day. Bear with me here. And the guy that owns it said he was talking to a bartender who was recommending Ford's Gin. So, Cappy, can I keep talking about bartenders?
Do it.
Okay. You're going to want to check out our Beyond the Drink series, which will air every other week right here on Beyond the Plate. It's also brought to you by our friends at Ford's Gin, because we're talking gin cocktails, of course. We've got some great bartenders and bartender duos this season.
Yes, for the big duo season. We're going to let everyone get to this episode, but really quick, one of the things we love about our partners here at Beyond the Plate is how they all give back, and Ford's does so within the bartending community. Makes complete sense. They've also supported events and fundraisers and continuously have the bartending community in mind. To learn more about Ford's Gin, go to fordsgin.com and follow them on social media at Ford's Gin. Please drink responsibly. Ford's London Dry Gin, 45% ABV, Brown-Forman, Louisville, Kentucky. Ford's Gin is a registered trademark. Ford's Gin, we thank you. One more thing, we have some awesome Beyond the Plate merch. You can find a link in your podcast player or go to our website, beyondtheplatepodcast.com. Head on over and check out our hats, tees, hoodies, and more. Again, that's beyondtheplatepodcast.com. Enjoy this week's episode. Today's duo are one of, if not the most notable father-son duos in America. Can I say that? I can say that. You are. We'll start with Dad. An icon, a pioneer, Chef Larry Forgione is hailed as the godfather of American cuisine and is largely responsible for changing the way Americans eat by using only seasonal, local ingredients, and quite frankly, beginning the entire farm-to-table movement. He's best known for An American Place, a restaurant he opened in 1983, earning 3 stars in the New York Times. He's been named Chef of the Year by my alma mater, Culinary Institute of America, named America's Best Chef by the James Beard Foundation. His American Place cookbook won Best American Cookbook by James Beard Foundation, and plenty more. Most recently, he is the co-founder and culinary director of the Conservatory for American Food Studies, located at the Greystone campus of the Culinary Institute of America in Napa Valley, California. His son, and now a dad himself, Chef Marc Forgione, is the acclaimed chef and owner of Peasant, Restaurant Marc Forgione, and 1/5. He's received Michelin stars, multi-star reviews from the New York Times, Star Chef's Rising Star of the Year, and more. I'm sorry, let me back up here. The youngest American-born chef to ever receive a Michelin star. Not bad. He was the winner of Iron Chef Season 3, the author of Marc Forgione, Recipes and Stories from the acclaimed chef and restaurant, and is also a partner of New York City's Laotian restaurant, Kio. Please enjoy this season premiere episode as we go beyond the plate with chefs Larry and Marc Forgione. Guys, what a crazy, talented father-son duo that honestly, I couldn't be more excited to kick this season off with. Larry, let's get going. Let's start with you. Tell us what you were like as a kid. What was little Larry Forgione up to as a kid?
I was, I guess, just a normal little kid. The exciting thing for me was that I had two grandmothers who loved cooking. One was my Irish grandmother, who went to church every morning, came back, put on her apron, and started cooking. And my Italian grandmother, who had a completely self-sufficient farm on eastern Long Island in Port Jefferson. Those were just wonderful memories for me.
Yeah. Were you interested in food when you were younger?
No, I wasn't. At one point, I was thinking about being a priest. And then after that, when I was older, I went to school to be a physical education teacher.
Interesting. What were family dinners at home and whatnot growing up?
Growing up, we always had wonderful family meals. In my home with my mother, she was very succinct in what, like every Monday was Monday, every Tuesday was Tuesday, every Wednesday was Wednesday. So you had the menu well in advance.
Was she a good cook, or did you lean mostly on grandma's?
No, my mother was a good cook. She wasn't as adventurous or as, say, knowledgeable as her mother or my father's mother, but we had wonderful meals growing up.
When did you start getting interested in food?
Well, when I was at school, the first year I was at college, I contracted pneumonia and missed the first, say, 8 or 12 weeks of a semester. And they said that if you step back now, you get back all of your money and then come back the following semester. So I did that. And during the break, I started working with my cousin Donald at a catering company in Brooklyn, and I just fell in love with it. And I sat out another semester and another semester, and then the rest is history.
And you eventually, were you in the first class of CIA or the first class at the Hyde Park campus, was it?
I was in the first class that graduated, that spent both years in Hyde Park.
Was Metz the president at the time? Was he there? Yeah. Amazing. Why did you decide to go to CI? Did someone talk you into that, or did you just want to take the career one step further?
No, my godfather, Donald, we went to a seminar or a talk about the Culinary Institute and learned all the different things. And we also met with some of the hotel people that were having apprenticeship programs. And after hearing all of that, we thought that it'd be better to get the education and the understanding of what's going on in kitchens and food.
That's pretty cool. I mean, culinary school then definitely isn't what it is today. Marc, tell us what kind of stuff Dad was punishing you for when you were young.
You might want to ask him.
I was gonna say, Dad, why don't you tell me about Marc? But
No, I mean, listen, I was a good kid, but I definitely got into trouble. I kind of look at it as fun trouble, but again, you can ask him about that. I always like to have fun. I still do. And growing up, you got to think about it. My dad was. Dad, I think you were, 26
yes.
when I was born? Yeah, so I mean, you try to think about that in like today's world. I think he had just quit his job too. I was born in 78. American Place opened in 1983. So my early childhood, for very obvious reasons, Dad was working a lot. I remember coming to like wake him up on Sunday mornings, and he would have like the whole face cloth over his eyes and
let me sleep. It's my one day I get to sleep.
Right. And maybe at the time I didn't understand it, but now as I'm a grown man and a chef, I definitely understand it. And I couldn't even imagine. I just had my first son at 40 and it's still difficult being in this business. So I can't even imagine, trying to start my culinary career, and not only culinary career at the end of the day. He wasn't just running a restaurant. He was changing the way Americans eat. So I think I obviously began to appreciate that as I got older. When I was growing up, I had no idea. You know what I mean? I thought Dad's restaurants were cool. As my dad said before too, he ate well growing up. Like we ate very well. My mom's a great cook too. They actually met at the Culinary Institute. Most people don't know that. So we had like real dinners, every day, 5:30. There was always a home cooked meal. We never had quote unquote processed or fast food or anything like that for dinner. If we did, it was like a treat. But food was always something important in our family, in our life. It still is. And it was never like pressure to become a chef. Food was just always kind of front and center. I thought it was for everybody until I got a little older and started going to other people's houses. And I realized, food, having a freshly made meal wasn't common. There's a funny, like kind of famous or infamous story in our neighborhood that I grew up in. I went to eat at somebody's house and I don't know how old I was. We'll call it 4th grade, 3rd grade, something like that. And I got over there and oh, what are we having for dinner? And I think the person's mother knew who my dad was, or that my dad was a chef at least. And she was like, oh, we're having raviolis. And I was like, that's great. I love ravioli. But, the raviolis I was used to eating were, I'm not going to say my mother was making homemade raviolis, but they were good, well-made, probably from the city, from Raffetto's or something like that, or from Little Italy. We just ate real raviolis. And that was my first taste of Chef Boyardee. And this is a true story. I took a bite and I literally had to get up and sprint into the bathroom, and I threw up.
No way.
The bathroom. And the mom got very upset. She got insulted, and she, And she called my mother, and she was like, "Come pick up Mark. I guess my food's not good enough for him."
That is fantastic. I love that. Wait, so you were doing family meals like 5:30. Larry, were you coming home to join these? Were you at the restaurant, or would you go back to the restaurant?
No, we lived too far away. It would have taken, especially at 5:30, it would have taken hours to get there and back. But whenever I did have time, we always had a wonderful dinner. And the weekend dinners were also very relaxing because everybody in the family had to do something for dinner. They had to contribute, either setting the table, chilling the water, making the salad, peeling potatoes, all sorts of things. So it was a good time because that was a time that everybody could reflect on things.
Yeah, I like it. And so it's mostly Mark, you, Mom, and you have siblings, right?
Yep. And the 3 out of the 4 are in the restaurant business now. My sister is the general manager of Peasant, and my brother is the corporate chef for Buddy V.
I think I realized that. That's cool. Did you spend a lot of time at the restaurant when you were young?
I don't know if a lot of time, but I have vivid memories of, like going into the restaurant and standing on like a dish rack, so that I could like see over the counter, and like, maybe them letting me like pick parsley or cut some berries or, we did it a couple different times where I would come into the city, and then again, I have memories of maybe going to a Yankee game after, or going to see the Rockefeller tree, or again, we grew up in Long Island, so I wasn't like a city kid. So it was like a big deal to like come in, spend a couple hours at the restaurant having fun, and then going to do something in the city. And then as I got older, I spent a couple different summers working in the kitchen. I think my first full time was probably 17 or 18. I think I did one like part-time summer leading into college. And then I think every summer in between college was in a kitchen. And then I took my sophomore year off entirely. And that was when I worked a full year. And that was, I think after that year, it wasn't like I was decided, okay, I'm going to be a chef, but I went back to school. I think it was for psychiatry or forestry or something, where at this point I had become pretty skilled for an 18-year-old college kid. And the story that I tell, and it's a true story, I had 4 college roommates, and at the time we all had a girl we were dating or seeing or whatever. So we had them all come over. So it was 8 of us total, and cooking in like a crappy like electric kitchen kind of college house kind of situation. But I made them like, I was having so much fun like doing it. I was making like beurre blanc and like chicken with asparagus. Again, college kids don't eat like that. But I just remember that was like kind of the moment where I was like, I was cooking for these people and watching and seeing how much fun I was having. And I was drinking wine, and my roommates were like setting the table with like flowers. And it was like, I just remember being so like turned on by that. And the next morning I had like psych class, and like I didn't want to go to psych class. So I was like, what am I doing? I'll finish college, but I think I'm probably going to do this cooking thing. And it wasn't 100% decided at that point, but that was when I was starting to hear like the voice in my head. You have to remember too, man, it was like very hard to, okay, I'm going to do what dad did. You know what I mean? I think, I was a rebellious kind of teenager, and to kind of like almost admit to myself, like, okay, I'm going to do what dad did. Like, you know what I mean? I think that getting over that hump was probably the hardest part than anything.
How was that for you, Larry? Did you want him to cook, or were you kind of letting him take his own path? What was going on in your head?
No, I never expected any of my children to go into the restaurant business. When you think of the time away from home, the amount of concentration it took to run a restaurant. So, but Mark, didn't you also make and sell dinners at college?
Well, yeah, we used to, it was called, I don't remember, I think it was like $5 or something, $5 in a dream. Everybody would give me $5 and I'd go to the grocery store.
That's fun.
So I'd cook dinner for 4 people for $20.
Is American Place the first restaurant you actually, like the actual kitchen you worked in technically, or was it somewhere else?
Kitchen, yes. I worked at this place called the Hofstra University Club as like a server / busboy / bartender kind of thing. But the first kitchen job, like I said, it was like a part-time gig at an American Place. And again, man, just to like reiterate, like even at that age, I didn't understand how important an American Place was, like to the country or to the world even.
Is there a moment when you realized or figured out that it was?
It probably wasn't until I started to work at other restaurants. And I noticed like the kind of attention, good or bad, because it wasn't all good, but the attention that I was getting for being everywhere I went. I was Larry's kid, Larry's son, son of Larry, and like every time I screwed up, there was always one sous chef in the kitchen that would bring it up, yeah, is that how your father showed you? Or, imagine if your father tasted this. But I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I think for better or for worse, it made me a much better cook, because I couldn't have an off day. I couldn't make a mistake or maybe kind of just disappear if I was tired. Like I was so front and center in every kitchen that I worked in. And like I said, sometimes it was bad. Like sometimes I had sous chefs just like out to get me. Cause I think some people, they had this vision of like, us growing up on like the Gold Coast of Long Island and like me eating caviar and scrambled egg for breakfast, and this like spoiled kind of rich kid coming in to be a chef. And like, trust me, I tell you, it couldn't have been more the opposite. Like as the stories you were just hearing, like, we were a very humble, hardworking kind of group of people. And I think once people that I was working with got to know me, they started to understand that a little bit. But, and I get it. Like from the outside looking in, it was like godfather of American cuisine. This kid probably has the golden goose or whatever. But it was interesting, to say the least, to be Larry Forgione's son as a young cook in the early 2000s.
And so when you went to college, you took the management route, right?
I did. It was that dinner that that was when I decided to change my major from forestry to hotel restaurant management. And it turned out UMass had a great program. And that was all coincidence.
You didn't do culinary school after that, right?
No. After college, I traveled Europe. And that was also really where I really got bit by the bug a little more. We stayed at like an Italian farm, and we stayed with these people in Switzerland. And I'd never really seen firsthand like farm life like that, where they make everything. I mean, everything from the bread to the olive oil. I mean, like these people made everything. And I like fell in love with the way that they were in love with food, kind of like, I think every chef talks about that moment where you might taste something and for me, it also happened at an American Place. Like first time I tasted my dad's crab cake, like my world kind of shook a little bit. And there was like a dinner that I had when I was in Calabria and it was just like chicken with eggplant. Like it wasn't anything fancy by any means. We're at a farmhouse, but it rocked my world. And then I came back from that trip, again, worked, got bounced around a little bit. And then I decided that I wanted to go somewhere to not be Larry Forgione's son anymore, kind of thing. So I went to Europe, where the cooks didn't know who I was or who any chef in America was. I was in France. Like at that time, it was the early 2000s, and like nobody gave a shit about anything going on in America culinary wise. So it was like I got to just get my butt kicked.
Last season, Will Godaro is on the podcast, and we talked a lot about his relationship with his dad, who was in the industry, and like things he would go to him for, which it sounds like he is close with him and bounced a lot of things career-wise off of him. Is that similar to you two? Are you often, or were you getting dad's advice as you were taking your path in the industry?
Yeah, I think once I've decided to do my own thing in particular, I don't think I've ever done anything without asking advice or having him look at it first or quote unquote give kind of a blessing. Or I think it has gotten for me, now we work together. I think in the early part of my career, I was kind of a little younger, and I don't know if egotistical is the right word, but trying to I need to do this on my own to prove something kind of thing. But again, there was always like that approval or blessing. Now that's all kind of gone. We have a very symbiotic, I think we probably text or talk daily about ingredients and ideas or even just cooking together.
Was he tough on you?
Tough on me? I wouldn't say tough on me, no. Listen, I tell everybody, my toughest critics are my parents, my wife, and now even my son, believe it or not. But they're the ones that are the most honest, and they should be. And they keep you humble. Everybody else will tell you great, but people closest to you will keep you humble and tell you the truth.
One thing that happened, which I think really solidified how Marc and I were going to work or being culinarians together, was Marc came to me after a couple of years of cooking and said that he wanted to go to work at one of the 3-star restaurants or 3 Michelin star restaurants in Europe. So I said, well, you research them, look them over, and when you decide which one you want to, if I know somebody, I'll make a call. And he came back to me and said, well, I really love the stuff that Michel Guérard is doing. And Marc never knew that I worked with Michel Guérard. So I thought that was really unbelievable. And when Marc got there, he was the first American to work there in over 20 years.
Wow, that's so cool. You're like, oh.
It was another kid, but he only lasted 2 weeks.
How are you when you got there? Was it a big kitchen shock for you, going to a French kitchen?
It was just a culture shock. It was 2003-ish, somewhere around there. And it's hard to put into words unless you see it, but the town of Eugenie had 400 people that lived there. And I think 300 of them worked at the restaurant. And there was nothing within 30 miles outside of, if you draw a circle on a map, there's nothing, zero, nothing. It was just vineyards and fields and nothing. You're in the middle of nowhere. I came from New York City at the time, so it was pretty wild. And then I didn't speak French. I thought I could get by with what I knew, but when I got there, I realized real quick that I didn't speak French. And that was probably the hardest part because everybody just basically treated me like I was dumb because I couldn't understand what they were saying. But it took 6 months to get in the rhythm. And then once I got in the rhythm, it was really beautiful. But I didn't have a phone. I didn't have a TV. I didn't have a computer. It was there was no, I don't even know if there was. I guess there was, but it wasn't like it is today. You know what I mean? My dad and I were just talking about this, I think, on Father's Day. I used to just go for walks on my day off because there was nothing else to do and there was nobody else to talk to. If I wanted to talk to somebody at home, I had to go to a payphone.
Larry, we touched a little bit on Marc's path. Can you give us 1 or 2 restaurants you worked in? No, I'm just kidding. Honestly, this episode can probably be 4 hours about your whole path in kitchens in a great way and the impact you've made. Not only in American cuisine, but food culture in general. But honestly, if we did want to hear about some major restaurant kitchen highlights to kind of whet the listener's palate, and I've said this a number of times in our episodes, but if anyone listening, I hope 100% of you are familiar with Larry, but please go and do your own research to look into his contributions to food in general, food culture, American food history, all that good stuff. But what would you share, Larry? Share as many or as little.
Well, one of the most exciting adventures I had in the kitchen was cooking at the Connaught Hotel in London. I really went there to cook with a particular chef. And I wrote to him he was the chef at Maxime's, and I wrote to him and he wrote back saying, well, if you want to work with me, come to London, that I'm not in Paris anymore, so come on over here. So I was supposed to go for 4 months and I ended up there for 2.5 years. And when I came back, my first job was with Guérard at this restaurant called Regine's that at 11 o'clock turned into a nightclub. And from there, I went to the River Cafe and had a great challenge at the River Cafe. The River Cafe was moving along, but without any direction. And when I took over the reins there, Buzzy, Michael O'Keefe, and I had an understanding that, if I was allowed to run the restaurant or run the kitchens the way that I thought and produce the food that I thought was a good thing to do, that we would become one of the best restaurants in New York. And about a year later, we became one of the best restaurants in New York, according to every critic there was. I stayed there till 83 and then opened an American place.
At what moment did utilizing local produce and other ingredients become so important to you?
I think it was when I was in Europe. I started to see all these incredible ingredients coming in the back door of the Connaught or the delivery entrance of the Connaught. And it was a lot of times it was just like a small farmer who went out and picked some mushrooms and would bring them to the corner. We got our lamb from Kent. Just everything that was coming in was an amazement to me. And then the big aha moment that I had was the chef had brought in this poulet de Bresse, and he cooked it, all the rest of the kitchen. Like, I thought we were in a religious ceremony, and everybody got a little taste of it. And my reaction to it was, well, this tastes just like my grandmother's chickens. And then realized that we had all of this wonderful stuff in America. We just weren't utilizing it. We needed to find it and put it on center stage. And that's why I've always said with my careers, I was really trying to build like the breadbasket of ingredients. I remember when I wanted to get fresh ducks from Long Island, and I went out there, and the guy told me, no, we only sell frozen ducks. And I said, well, weren't the ducks not frozen before you froze them? And he said, yes. And I said, well, can I get like 36 a week before you freeze them? And he said, no, that's it, no. So I finally found somebody who would do it. And then it was just all trial and error. Everything's trial and error when you're in the restaurant industry.
Can you tell, is this free range story true? This is crazy.
Yes, I was at the Connaught, and the piano player came in and he had a basket of all these multicolored eggs that were not dyed. They were just multicolored. So I asked him where he got them from, and he told me this little farm stand in upstate New York. And so I went and I figured if this guy's crazy enough to grow chickens that lay multicolored eggs, he's probably a good choice for working with to create these chickens. And we, after about a year, found the right cross, the right feed, the right everything. And I couldn't think of what to call them because farm fresh anything was farm fresh. Everything was farm fresh, all natural. Everything was all natural. So I tried to think of what possibly could I call these. And I was, as nerdy as this sounds, I was reading a book about the history of chickens in America. And America actually had a chicken that was native to America called the prairie chicken. It's in the description. It said, well, it would use the forest for protection, and they would come out and freely roam the meadows eating, and then they'd get back inside. So I thought, okay, free range, that sounds good.
I came across that and I was like, what? Like, I need to confirm this. That's mind-blowing. Talk about leaving a stamp on American food and culture and all that.
I wish I had a nickel for every time it was used.
That was my next question. You own the trademark?
You can't trademark something like that.
Okay, so this James Beard story, you had wanted him to come to, was it American Place you had wanted him to come to, but he hadn't?
It was the River Cafe. And I decided when I was going to go full bore American that I needed some guidance and needed somebody who knew what was going on in America over the years. And James Beard always came up front and center. So I was trying to get him to come to the restaurant and try some food. And he just, I don't know, I guess they thought of Brooklyn as some foreign country. So what I started to do is as we got ingredients in, I'd make a little gift basket and send it over to him. And by the third gift basket, he finally came over. And from that point, we've been friends, and he ate at American Place restaurant every Thursday.
Did you know your food was that good when you were sending him these baskets, or was it more of the concept of what you were doing on the local front with food that you wanted him to see, or was it kind of both of those things?
I wanted him to see that I was going back to the roots of American cooking. So there was nobody ever heard of morels from America or chanterelles from America. The better kitchens used canned mushrooms from France. And he was just very excited. Like he said in an article that the River Cafe, where I was the first person to serve buffalo in New York in 60 years.
And a little birdie told me that he was instrumental in helping come up with the name for An American Place.
That's true.
Yeah.
An American Place was named by James Beard.
So you've worked with some incredible people, but on the contrary, Larry, some incredible chefs have worked under you. I was excited to learn another friend of the podcast, Chef Alex Guarnaschelli, spent some time in your kitchens.
Yes, she did.
I've always been intrigued by Alex's journey, through Europe and here and whatnot. But I had asked Alex about her experience working with you, and I want to just play this message really quick.
Okay.
We'll take a listen.
I remember having next to no experience working in Larry Forgione's kitchen, and he was so intimidating. He asked me to work the grill one night and cook steaks, and I literally had no idea what I was doing and overcooked everything. So he just stopped and looked at me halfway through dinner service, and instead of giving up on me, he just said, "Take it off 2 minutes before you think it's cooked." Kind of Obi-Wan Kenobi, kind of Zen, kind of made no sense, and yet it made all the sense in the world. And he was always doing stuff like that, talking like that. Just very valuable little nuggets of information delivered with so much patience and just a tiny bit of New York City ennui.
It's very nice of her to say that.
She was great. I asked her for one little thing, and I got flooded with a bunch of fun little stories. Do you remember what kind of cook she was in your kitchen?
I do remember her being there. As she said, she had next to nothing for experience. And I always, when there were young culinarians in the kitchen, I always wanted them to experience different stations, because if not, it wouldn't be a great learning experience. I didn't want them to learn one thing. I wanted them to learn as much as they can.
Yeah, I love that. She went on to say that when she was working for you in 1992, she said you were the most important chef in New York City, and you had a wonderful sense of humor and approach to everything, which it seems like was later exemplified by the story she told me of when she dropped a whole flat of eggs on your feet and you were wearing suede loafers. And she said you just looked at her, shook your head, and kept walking.
What else could you do?
Right. That's so funny. Larry, was there a moment you knew Marc had it in him as a kid, like the cook gene, if you will?
I knew it after when he was in the kitchens at An American Place, he was really good and very focused and just a wonderful person to have in the kitchen. And we were talking one time, and the Culinary Institute came up, and I just said, Culinary Institute, you're already more advanced than anybody coming out of the culinary right now. So if you're thinking of staying with cooking, do that. And then that's when we discussed management school or something like that, something different.
So Marc, after France...
There's actually a fun story that I think you'll probably enjoy. It was right after my parents got to watch the final of The Next Iron Chef. They were in the crowd. They allowed them to be in the crowd. But they got shuffled out when they made the announcement because, it was a taped show. So they couldn't have anybody know who won, right? But the battle was Battle Thanksgiving. And I knew I had this idea of what I wanted to do. And I remember kind of, again, as we were just talking about, kind of bouncing it off, my dad. And he didn't say don't do it, but he responded with, "That sounds a little risky." That was kind of all he said. "It sounds kind of risky. This is a big deal, Marc." And I was like, I know. I just feel like this is what it was for. And that's a whole other story. But anyway, so after the finals, so they got to watch the whole thing. And after it, I met them in the city at a bar, and my dad pulls me outside. On air, I can't tell them that I told them I won, but let's just say that we were all pretty happy. And, where everybody's kind of going crazy and, cheersing. Anyway, my dad pulls me outside. We're outside the Gainsbourg Hotel in the meatpacking. And he kind of puts his hand behind my head and, he's like, listen, today I think was the first time, and I totally get this again now, especially being a father. He basically said to me, today's the first day I realized that you're your own chef. You're a man. And keep in mind, I'm 32, I think at the time, 31, something like that. But he said point blank, that watching you kind of own what you were doing. At the end of the day, I was cooking for Donatella and Michael Simon and Bobby Flay and Morimoto and Alton Brown. And, these are like pretty serious players, especially at that time in the culinary. Simon Majumdar, he just said, well, me watching you handle yourself the way that you did and cook what you did and pull off this crazy idea, but the fact that you did it, and, we both started to cry and we were both hugging and, it was kind of like this moment. And then out of nowhere, we get a tap on the shoulder from this homeless guy, and the homeless guy, he's crying and he looks up at us and he goes, listen, I'm homeless here in the city and I haven't talked to my son in whatever it was, 22 years. But he must have been listening to this whole conversation. We didn't notice him there. He said, you know what? I'm going to go find my son, and just so I can give him a hug.
Guys.
And then it was it was one of the craziest stories. Every time I tell it, I get a little choked up, but it was one of the craziest moments. But when you just asked, when you had just asked him, did you know the moment where you knew that he could do it? Whether he remembers or not, I think that was the moment where he knew I was going to be okay.
Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thanks for telling that one. Marc, some key highlights you want to share after coming back from Europe, up until opening of your first restaurant?
Yeah, again, once I came back from Europe, right before I went to Europe, I got to meet Laurent Tourndel, and we opened BLT Steak together. And that was a cool experience because I got to see the beginning of, I feel like it would have been and I'm not comparing BLT to an American Place, but, BLT exploded. And to have not only a ringside seat, but I was very involved in helping and creating these dishes because Laurent wasn't very experienced with American food and he wanted to do his spin on an American steakhouse. And I had that experience, obviously coming from where I came from. So to be there from the get-go of something that exploded the way it did was, I think, instrumental in quote unquote, me seeing what it took and how lucky you have to be and the things you need to have on your menu and who do you eat press wise and you know what I mean? It wasn't just the cooking at that point. It's watching a business being born.
And so you were involved from the first BLT and then...
The first BLT, most people don't know this, but it was myself, Laurent Tourndel in the basement of the defunct, at the time was AZ, which then turned into BLT Fish, but AZ had just closed and they were renovating then Pazzo, which became BLT Steak. But while they were renovating Pazzo, it was literally me and Laurent Tourndel just in a kitchen together. And he would come up to me and be so how do you make barbecue sauce? What goes into steak sauce? You know what I mean? What is Maytag blue cheese? You know what I mean? And it was so weird because this is all the stuff that my dad had been teaching me my whole life. So it was and this was before France, by the way. So it helped open BLT Steak. Obviously, BLT Steak turned into this amazing thing. But when I had met Laurent, I was already signed up to go to France. So we all knew it was only going to be 6 months or whatever it was that I was working there. And that was the deal. Help open BLT Steak and we'll see you later. But then when I got back from France, he was opening BLT Prime and he asked me to be the chef. And that was my first chef de cuisine job, which... could argue I wasn't old enough to do it, but at the same time, you either sink or swim. And looking back at the 27-year-old me or 26-year-old, however old I was, there's a lot of things I did wrong, but at the same time, it was basically, again, like I said, sink or swim. So I had to swim. And then I did that for a while, became his corporate chef. And again, I think I opened 5, maybe 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It was 5 BLTs in 2.5 years. So it was almost like going to school for opening restaurants. And what I mean by that is you could work your whole life in this business for 20 years. And if you've never opened a restaurant, there are some very serious lessons that you need to know that is 6 months out of opening the restaurant. You know what I mean? And I think that's why I was able to do things at the young age that I was able to do them, because when I gave notice at BLT, I was 20. I opened Forge in 2008, which means I was 29. So I think I gave notice at BLT when I was 28, give or take. And I had already opened the grill room, I think, with my dad. And then I opened Pazzo with Patricia. It was almost like every restaurant I did was an opening. And then I helped open Above with Kazuto and my father again. And then again, all the BLTs. So by the time I was 28 years old, I had opened 10 restaurants.
Do you love the opening or do you just know how to do it well? What are your Do you like that process? Part
Well,
of the
I
process?
wasn't given the choice. It just kind of, I wasn't given the choice. It just kind of happened. But I'm kind of explaining like why at a young age, like I felt confident enough to give notice at BLT and then do my own thing. I knew I was ready to go do my own thing when I was kind of keeping ideas and dishes in my pocket and not sharing them with Laurent. You know, I was writing notebooks with ideas and I was like, oh, this one's too good of an idea to give to BLT. You know what I mean? And that was when I knew, okay, it's time. And I started to look for spaces. And one of my dad's old managers is actually the guy that introduced me to the space on Reed Street.
That's really cool. I'm always curious how someone who goes off to do their own thing and succeed, like what's that moment? How do they know when? And your story, your example of what you were just saying is really interesting, really fascinating.
Yeah, listen, it's the hardest thing for a chef to do is to take that plunge, you know, because opening a restaurant is not for everybody. That doesn't make you a good chef or a bad chef. It's not for everybody. But, you know, that plunge is, you know, a serious one. Like you could be a chef de cuisine for somebody forever. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's a much different animal when you say, I'm putting my name on the front door.
We had discussed when we thought Marc had made it as a chef in a way. When did you know you had made it as a chef?
I knew I was on my way when I was at Regine's, and then at the River Cafe, I just knew that it was like opening a new restaurant in a certain sense, because it was just in so much, the kitchen was in such a disarray that it was really hard to understand. And I remember I got a call from Craig Claiborne at the time, and we were talking about what was going to be going on and so on. And he said, you know, the River Cafe was a perfect example of continental cuisine from a continent not yet discovered, because it was all over the place.
And just, if I could like touch on that too, right now, actually at Forge, my restaurant, every week, we've been doing it now since we've reopened. So I think we're in like week 6 or 7, but every week we're studying one of the like founding American chefs, because I don't think the younger kids really understand how hard it was for people like my dad and Alice and Dean and Mark and Paul, and I'm only naming first names because I think you guys know. Obviously, I know Dad, you know who they are, but you know, like I swear to God, you say to a 25-year-old kid who is Mark Miller, and they don't know. You know what I mean? And there was no Food Network, and they weren't on the Food Network, but we're doing these weekly, we'll call them Googles, whatever, and we're kind of trying to show not just the cooks, but the servers too. Like the fact that there's even such a thing as an American chef. You know, my dad was obviously leading the way to talk about, you know, taking that plunge to look at an entire industry and say, we're American and we're proud and we can do this. I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but I mean, in the beginning, it was like a laughing stock. Like, what do you mean? It's impossible. I'm sure my dad heard numerous times, that's impossible. It's not going to happen. You can't do that. And I just don't know if those guys and women, men and women, get enough credit for taming the Wild West the way they did.
100%. So is that program like a staff pre-shift research and share type thing? Or is it something you like that's going to see like be on the menu, like showcasing Dean Fearing or whoever?
You know, it's funny you asked that. I have stuff on the menu all the time influenced by some of those names I just mentioned. And I've done throwback menus to an American Place and to my dad numerous times. We actually just did an American Place quote unquote pop-up. It was one night only, but we did, it was probably like 6 months ago?
I think so.
Something like that. But somebody bought out the restaurant and they were like, you know, you can do any theme you want. And I suggested, how about we do an American Place? And we did the whole menu, the bread. And it wasn't interpretations of dishes. It was the dishes.
Were you there, Larry? Did they represent well or what?
Yep. It was a great presentation and a great experience.
And I think you see how timeless the food is too. I mean, there's a little more heavy cream than we do now, but at the end of the day, the dishes were, you could put them on menus today.
All right. Touching upon some of the restaurants, Marc, I feel like I've noticed this theme with many of your places, like this sense of community in a way. I think I saw, you know, with Forge, you wanted people to not have to get dressed up and be fancy, but walk in from the street, have good food, enjoy an excellent meal. I even think the story of how Peasant came to be is so fascinating. Can you just share for people listening, like that, the Peasant story?
If there's a lesson to be learned from the Peasant story is like, just always understand that, and I try to explain this to younger people too, the importance of when you speak, what you're speaking of, believing in what you're saying and who you're saying it to, and also understanding that like when you do speak, like people are listening and your words are important, just like today. But, I lived on Mulberry Street, so I ate at Peasant many times over the years. Frank and I were friendly. I wouldn't go so far as to say we were friends, but we were friendly. Every time I came in, we would say hi, and he would send us dishes. But I was like head over heels in love with Peasant, just like many other people. And I was hosting a New York City Food and Wine Festival dinner there in 2018 or 19. And I gave a speech about, just how much I love Peasant, how much I love Frank. And Frank is kind of an inspiration to me. He's like the antithesis of a celebrity chef. I never liked the term celebrity chef, but he, every time I went to Peasant, he was literally working the pasta station with a white bandana or napkin tied around his head, always cooking, always a little angry, but always there. I ate there 20 times. There was never a night that he wasn't there. And not just there expediting, like cooking the food. I tried to work the pasta station with him a couple of times. It's insane. But anyway, I gave this speech just about that. Frank is like what every chef wishes they could be. And after the speech, he was just kind of taken aback. I think he was a little surprised to hear how important Peasant was. And Peasant, at the end of the day, was influential on the way that Forge looks and, kind of my philosophies on simplicity. But anyway, he was taken aback by what I said. And because of that speech, he called me a couple months later and he told me he was retiring. And I was upset that he was retiring, obviously. And I didn't realize he was asking me if I wanted it. But, halfway through the conversation, I was like, Frank, wait a second. Are you asking me if I want Peasant? I thought he was asking if I would cook dinner one night to the last week or something. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden it started to come into focus. And, he kind of in his frank way was like, what the fuck does it sound like I'm saying? Yes. And he was very adamant, though. He wanted to be instrumental in who took it over, not to keep it Peasant. He made it very clear that I could do whatever I wanted with it. But he didn't want it to turn into... I think first he said, I don't want this to turn into an Apple store or a bank but at the same time, if it's going to be a restaurant, I don't know, it's just too much blood and sweat and tears in this place. It'd be a shame if somebody that didn't care for it took it over. So we struck a deal. And at the time, most people don't know this, but I was already signed up to do a wood-burning Italian restaurant in the meatpacking district. But I couldn't say no to Peasant. I just couldn't say no. So I did it. And then that other thing fell through. So it ended up working out, which I guess is another lesson too. I try to tell young kids all the time, and you got to follow your gut. It's not always your brain. Sometimes your heart has to tell you what to do, and your brain usually disagrees with your heart. But if you don't take those chances, and you'll never know. If you don't swing for a home run, you're never going to hit one. But that doesn't mean you need to swing for a home run every pitch.
Can you, either one of you, I want to hear more about 1/5, a couple things. Does community come in to play there? And just in general, I hear there's some fun things you all are working on together there.
Yeah, all the restaurants are, we try to do, listen, in the restaurant business, you got to work a lot. Hearing Alex talk about my dad and the way that he was in the kitchen, I try to do the same thing now. I think as I've gotten older, again, as I just said, you work a lot, many hours. So why not try to make it where everybody's working there is in a good place in the community. And now that there's 3, we try to have the 3 kind of interact as much as possible. And, we just had a big chef collective kind of lunch last week, and we're trying to do the same thing with the managers. And my dad is now, it sounds weird to say this sentence out loud, but my dad is the culinary consultant for the Respect Hospitality Group. And I'll let him talk a little more about the things that he finds, but he's found some amazing ingredients, and who better in the world to find cool ingredients than the man himself. So I asked him if he would do it last year, and it's been great.
Talk to me about what you're up to there, Larry.
First of all, it's a great honor and privilege to be able to work hand in hand with Marc. What I try to do is influence the restaurants by ingredients, which really goes all the way back to my roots. So I'm always looking for things with Marc. I just ended up getting samples of one of the few purebred, 100% purebred Wagyu cattle from up in Vermont. We get we call it rose veal because the veal's not really white because it's naturally raised. So we get a half a veal in every so often and distribute it amongst the restaurants.
Is this a term you invented? Are we foreshadowing here? 20 years from now, rose veal's going to be a thing that you invented or created, or what?
We're going to try to get the patent this time.
And then we found Mark always talked about mutton, that he would love to try mutton and get it in. He went to a restaurant to eat mutton, and I'm not going to say which restaurant, but it wasn't mutton. But I found a guy in upstate New York, and actually in the Hudson Valley, that had mutton. So we were running mutton racks, like the top of a rack. I think they call it a Denver cut. So it was like barbecued mutton bones. And then, of course, as everything, when you're dealing with farmers, somehow the wig out, or you have to really keep them, like massaging them and keeping them coming. Like the veal guy, he can't find anybody to bring it down from his farmers up by Saratoga. So I just sent him a text saying, well, I'll meet you halfway and bring it down to New York. That's how important it is.
Love that. And then isn't there another part of this program I made a note, pinza? Is that how, am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah. That was something that when I was out at the conservatory, we grew our own wheat, and they were all ancient grains. So we were working with that, and my friend Mark Miller told me about the pinzas and so on, what you could do with it's an ancient grain pizza, and we just started working on it and fell in love with it. I went to Rome to study with somebody and came back, and it's basically a pinza is Roman pizza.
I know where I'm coming on my next trip to New York. I'm based in Chicago, Larry, so I always have my list of when I come back to New York. All right, for both of you, as I mentioned before we started recording, the podcast celebrates social impact with every guest that we talk with, and learning how each of them do it keeps me and the team that works on this inspired. And as you all have your own way, whether it's through an event, a cause, supporting another friend's cause, whatever it may be. But I just wanted to give you both a moment to shine a light on some of those causes, whether it's causes you've been involved with in the past, ones you currently are, anything upcoming.
Well, we just finished an event that I co-founded 35 years ago for City Meals, for Meals on Wheels. And in those 35 years, it's called the Chef's Tribute it was originally going to be a birthday party for James Beard, and he passed away, so we decided to do a tribute to James Beard, and over the years it's morphed into a chef's tribute. So 35 years, some of the best chefs in the country have come, some of the best chefs in Europe have come, and like I started to say, in 35 years, I think we've raised $26 million.
Unbelievable. And if anyone is an avid listener of the podcast, we've probably heard Waxman talk about that event. We've probably heard Wolfgang Puck talk about that event. So a number of incredible chefs and supporters.
Oh, it was Jonathan Waxman and I that founded that dinner.
I love it. So cool. I would love to get to that one day. How about you, Mark? I know you've got a number of things on your plate.
Yeah, I mean, the charities that I'm like on the board or very involved is the Chefs for Kids Cancer. I'm sure you know the story of her, but Gretchen, her little boy, passed away. I think he was 5. She started with cookies. They did a cookie sale one year, and now it's turned into millions and millions of dollars for pediatric cancer research, which for whatever reason is the least funded cancer research, which makes no sense to anybody that I tell that to. So I've been very involved with that. Obviously, the City Meals on Wheels, I've jumped on with that. A City Harvest. Again, people I find are always surprised at how generous chefs are, and I try to explain that it's just another extension of what we do. Like, our entire life is generosity. So you tell me that I have to show up somewhere to cook for something, and I can help save a kid's life or put food on somebody's plate that needs it. Just show me where to go and when, and I'm there.
Larry, is this something you instilled like in Mark or your kids, or as Mark kind of alluded to, do we feel this like more of a natural thing for chefs? Well,
yeah, I think chefs are very generous. They're very generous with their time. Maybe 35 years ago, you could, if you wanted to, you could cook at a charity event 3 times a week. But it is about giving back. It's about just giving back to your community. You have a talent and you should help other people with it.
Thank you both for that. I'm going to do a quick speed round and then we'll close it out. And I will ask a question and we'll give both a turn. So number 1, what did you have for dinner last night? Mark, you can go first.
I had dinner at a restaurant called Chop Shop on 10th Avenue. I had ribs, some spicy cucumber salad, a shrimp summer roll, and some Chinese broccoli.
Larry, how about you?
Last night, my wife and I cooked at home, and I made grilled swordfish with white beans, tomatoes, and spinach, and a little bit of za'atar spiced butter.
Number 2, name a smell in the kitchen you love. Marc.
Garlic in olive oil.
The smell of a wood-burning oven.
Nice. How about name a smell in the kitchen you hate?
Smell? I hate something burning.
Probably a backed-up grease trap.
What pisses you off in the kitchen?
Laziness.
It was the same thing. People who don't focus got the wrath.
How about what makes you happy in the kitchen?
Kind of like the antithesis of laziness. Actually, an easier way to answer that, watching people smile after they taste the first bite of food.
Well, right now what makes me happy is being able to work with Marc. And second, it's I always love meeting young cooks and talking to them and probably interrupting their day, but just I always get energized by being around young chefs.
That's cool. I'm sure they're thrilled that you are interrupting their day. Last one, Larry, one word that describes Marc.
Creative.
Marc, one word that describes your dad.
Genius.
Love you guys. All right, closing out here. This is the start of our duos season, as I mentioned. It's usually been one guest, and this season is all going to be pairs, duos. And some people make great duos. Clearly, you guys have found a groove. And some duos have a hard time working together, quite frankly. So for the restaurant cook, manager, server, college student, business person in general that's listening and maybe going through a tough time with the other half of their duo, your father's son, but how do you make it work? And then I also want to know the best advice for a future duo so we can split it up.
Well, I think the way that it works is that you have mutual respect for each other. You know what lanes you're driving in, and you just there's the ego goes away when Marc and I are talking. There's just no ego about it.
Yeah, and I was gonna say I think my hardest part in the beginning of our relationship working together was maybe trying to act like he wasn't my dad. And I think as I've gotten older, it's more about embracing it and saying, yes, I'm working with my father. And I think my advice to somebody maybe working with their wife or their brother or cousin or father, son, whatever it is, it's okay to acknowledge that and treat each other like that at work too. Because if you pretend like it's something that it's not, I find, at least for me, that was when it started to click or to hum a little bit. It was yeah, you know what? You are my dad, or he is my dad, and we are working together. And that would be my advice to somebody if they're having a hard time. Take a step back and realize that you love that person and you should enjoy it.
Thank you both. I appreciate it greatly. Thank you for your time. This is a heck of a way to kick off this next season. So I knew I had some great stories coming, but the ones we continue to sprinkle in were incredible. And I think this is going to be quite an inspiring episode for people definitely inside the industry and likely outside of the industry as well. So appreciate your time, both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again to chefs Larry and Marc Forgione. Find Marc on Instagram at Marc Forgione. To learn more about City Meals on Wheels, go to citymeals.org. To learn more about Cookies for Kids Cancer, go to cookiesforkidscancer.org. And to learn more about City Harvest, go to cityharvest.org. We'll share a link to those websites in the episode notes and at beyondtheplatepodcast.com. Find me and keep up to date with this podcast across all social media at On Cappy's Plate or go to beyondtheplatepodcast.com. Beyond the Plate is on all the socials at BT Plate Podcast. This episode was produced by myself, along with Ian Cohen, Joel Yetton, and Sean Petrosian. Our digital media producer is Sarah McClellan-Mee. Our music has been composed by Goldford. Find him at iGoldford. And as always, a special shout out to my wife, Katie. If you do have a moment, we'd love and appreciate it if you could rate or review and subscribe to this podcast on your listening site of choice. Don't forget to join us next Wednesday for an episode of Beyond the Drink, our companion podcast of Beyond the Plate, brought to you by our friends at Ford's Gin. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Plate. I'm Cappy, and remember, there are never too many cooks in the kitchen.